The dream that became Adirondack Camp Cherith was inspired by a list. A very long list of disappointed pioneer girls turned away from Pocono Camp Cherith each summer. The Metro New York Pioneer girls shared the camp with the Mid-East clubs, and there were just too few weeks of camp to go around. Pioneer Girls Headquarters asked Stumpy, June Stump, to head up the Metro New York ministry. Her mandate was to get those girls to camp, even though it meant building a new one.
Moving east in January 1960, I directed 5 weeks at Pocono Camp Cherith for the North New Jersey campers, and we rented various campsites for a couple more weeks for Metro New York, Long Island, Hudson River Valley campers, all the while we were searching for a campsite to purchase. Each year there was one property that made me say, this is it. The first near Middleton, the next near Albany, but always something came up that just as clearly said, no, this isn't it. The third site was it.
Bruce Baker, Christian Service Brigade's area rep, suggested a site near Glens Falls. It had 400 acres with a 45-acre private lake and was owned by a retired physician named Alvin Davenon. The white-haired gentleman said his father had wanted this property to become a Boy Scout camp. A potato field had been flooded to create the lake, and some lumber lay waiting in the barn. The doctor liked the idea of selling the property for a camp, but wasn't sure about a camp for girls. June asked for maps of the site so she could make a boundary hike. The doctor seemed impressed by this, perhaps realizing that a camp directed by June Stump would be as action-packed as any camp for boys. But Dr. Davenon was still uncertain, so June invited him to visit Pocono Camp Cherith. He told June that he found his answer in the happy faces of the campers. Dr. Davenon not only agreed to sell, he made the terms generous, a down payment of $35,000 of the total $85,000. He would wait 5 years for any payment of the principal. Instead, the camp would pay the interest on the existing mortgage, $2,750 a year. In 1971, Dr. Davenon deferred payment of the principal another 5 years. The Mid-East Pioneer Girls Club bought out Metro New York's share in Pocono Cherith for $25,000. That left $10,000 to raise, as well as all the costs for construction and equipment. Finding the money was a real item for prayer.
We decided to get the work done as inexpensively and as quickly as possible. We decided to gung-ho it instead of waiting another year and turning away even more kids. We took possession of the 400-acre site that October, did planning, basic road work, and quitting.
The plan? Adirondack Camp Cherith would open July 1 for a full 9-week season.
I remember lying awake at night wondering, have we thought of everything? Especially kitchen equipment. There just was so many details.
Despite generous gifts, more funds were needed. But God had been growing the answer for generations. By selectively cutting trees in its pine and hemlock forest, the camp improved the site and earned $25,000 in the process. The long, hard Adirondack winters added to the challenge. 4 inches of snow fell as late as Mother's Day, and the July 1st opening was not far off. A Christian builder named Leon McLaughlin had prefabbed the cabins in the fall and winter for quick assembly in the spring, and they certainly did go up quickly.
Late the next spring, while I was down in New Jersey for a camp board meeting, the camp construction crew put in the piers for the Pilgrim cabins. They were much closer and more whopper-jawed than we intended them to be, but there was no time to do the work over again.
The counselors were a little surprised to arrive for pre-in-camp training and find there would be no training. There was still a camp to build. June was a great delegator, so everyone had a job. Linda Wanacelia spent her week deep in the woods swatting mosquitoes with sappy hands as she scraped the bark off the future flagpole. Yet she loved investing herself in something permanent. Along with the other counselors, Linda had a part of camp she could point to with pride, saying, "I did that."
The day before opening, 2 cabins fifth grade girls still needed roof finishing. And due to the Vietnam War, tents for the colonists and explorers had not arrived. One guide from one of our larger churches, after looking around, asked me how many parents I thought would not leave their girls. I was utterly speechless. The thought had never occurred to me that that was even a possibility. Someone did hear one mother trying to persuade her daughter not to stay because the roof was unfinished. But she insisted, and so everyone stayed. Colonists and explorers slept on mattresses the first week until the tents arrived on the rec hall floor.
That was July 1, June Stump's birthday, and Adirondack Camp Cherith's dedication day. By dusk, each cabin had a roof, and the flagpole was up, along with the flag.
The workmen thought there'd be a problem with the girls being in the way during the week, that first week of camp, but the girls were at their activity areas most of the working day.
June led the fledgling camp through its first 3 seasons. Then Pioneer Girls asked her to return to headquarters as National Camp Consultant. In 1969, Barbara Zimmerman, known as Dickie, took over as Pioneer Girls Regional Rep. Barb prepared camp for years of service by recruiting dedicated staff and putting the right systems in place. During that time, the camp was able to purchase an additional 100 acres north of the camp for $10,000, thanks to a loan from longtime supporter Dr. Fred Lathrop. Some of that land became the archery range and a much-needed septic field. In January, June Stump received a call that Dr. Davenant had died. Barb and Pioneer Girls Rep Janet Wood attended the funeral, wishing every guest could know what the doctor's generosity had done for so many girls. That February, the board was notified that the doctor's will returned to the camp the $35,000 down payment and forgave the balance. Dr. Davenant had promised this to June years before, but had asked her to keep it a secret, which she had done. That April, Dr. Lathrop called, forgiving the camp's debt to him after an additional year's payment. At the April board meeting, Jan Wood said, "We walked through the Red Sea, and it was parted." Lenore Hurley, or Sandy, directed the 1974 season. There was a renewed vision of God's hand in the ministry. The summer's theme was Run the Race, and it did seem as if the race had just begun. Adirondack Camp Cherith celebrated its 10th anniversary with Janet Wood as director. In week 8 of 1975, the counselors arrived at the birdhouse for prayer meeting to find that the dam had broken. Suddenly, there was a flurry of activity and a new item for prayer. Counselors even dragged the rugs out of the birdhouse to shove into the gap. The break didn't harm people or property, but it did result in a permanent low tide for the rest of the summer. The dam needed major repair. The cost? An even $35,000. Once again, the Lord used Dr. Davenant's generosity to meet the camp's needs. In 1978, Lynn Vanderhuff, or Ruddy, became camp director. That year, the Cherith volunteers built the craft porch, ingeniously designed by former camper Ellen Matlack. Once the craft classes moved from the barn to the new building, the instructors no longer needed to arrive early to shoo away bats sleeping above the craft projects. In 1979, a woman who had grown up with camp became director. For many people, Nancy Halliday represents the original vision in a person. It's not surprising that Nancy, known as Wally, has led the camp through more than half of its ministry. With her leadership and support, Adirondack has implemented some exciting programs, keeping pace with campers' interests and needs. In 1980, the new activity building not only changed the landscape, it changed the way camp functioned. Finally, there was a home for classes like aerobics, drama, and rainy day sports. There was a comfortable all-camp gathering place for worship services, evening programs, and the Friday night campfire. What else is new? The ropes course, soccer camp, recruiting counselors from other countries, greater missions awareness, a nature building and program that helps the girls understand and respect God's delicate creation, an improved counselor and leadership training program with a wilderness trip, and a camp administrator, first Jan Wood and then Diane Liddy. But the most important thing has stayed the same.
Our main goal is to reach and disciple girls for Jesus Christ through a guided experience in Christian living in the outdoors. We try to communicate to the girls that their faith in Christ is something that's an integrated package, whether they're involved in a Bible study or a canoeing class. Their faith in Christ needs to impact every area of their lives.
Adirondack Camp Cherith. What started with a waiting list of disappointed girls has gone on to serve over 20,000 campers in the last 30 years. Hundreds have met Jesus Christ and learned the everyday disciplines that allowed them to grow up in Him.
Camp is a place where God brings real Christianity into the lives of both staff and girls. It seems that all of a sudden faith in Christ really makes sense to kids. The camp experience encourages a disciplined spirit, and I believe that's why there are so many Cherith women who have gone on to missions and effective church ministry over the years.
Will God use Adirondack Camp Cherith in the next 30 years? As Dr. Davenant did, you'll find the answer in the happy faces of the campers.
Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and His greatness is unsearchable.